At my mother-in-law's birthday dinner in Rome, my seat was missing. Ethan chuckled and said, "Oops, guess we miscounted," while the entire Remington clan laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I just smiled and replied, "Seems I'm not family," before turning and walking away. My name is Isabelle Monroe, and I built my life from the ground up with no help, no shortcuts, and definitely no old money safety net. I founded Monroe Company, Boston's premier luxury event planning firm, known for precision, elegance, and delivering the impossible. I turned chaos into beauty and made a name for myself among people who once wouldn't even return my calls. And that's exactly how I met Ethan Remington. It was at a winter charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital at the Four Seasons, a night of white orchids, candlelight, and high society donors with deep pockets. Ethan stood by the bar in a tailored navy suit, a glass of scotch in hand, watching me as I directed the staff. "So you're the magician behind this," he asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "My mother's looking for someone to handle her 60th next spring. I think I just found her." Ethan had that rare ability to make you feel like the only person in the room, and I, in my exhaustion and pride, let my guard down. One job for the Remingtons turned into 2, then 10, and before I knew it, I was planning every milestone of their golden existence. Ethan and I started seeing each other 6 months later, and by the following year, he proposed. I thought I had finally stepped into the fairy tale I'd always been told existed behind those gated estates. But there were cracks, even then small hairline fractures in the pristine image they presented to the world. His mother, Vivienne, smiled with her teeth, but her eyes stayed cold and calculating. "You've done well for yourself," she said once, patting my hand at dinner. "Self-made women are so American." At first, I brushed it off, an awkward relic from a family drenched in generational wealth and outdated values. Ethan always seemed different, thoughtful, progressive, uninterested in the politics of pedigree. "Don't mind her," he would say, kissing my temple. "You impress her more than she lets on." I wanted to believe that. I needed to. So I buried the red flags beneath my ambition and the image of a future where I finally belonged. And when he asked me to marry him after 11 months of dating, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding, of course, became the social event of the year: gold foil invitations, a private garden ceremony, and a reception dripping in soft light and hand-cut crystal. I planned it all myself because I didn't trust anyone else with the vision. Vivienne offered her opinions on everything, from the guest list to the hors d'oeuvres. "Try not to make it too nouveau," she advised, as though my taste was somehow garish. I compromised where I could, held firm where it mattered, and told myself love was worth a few bruises to the ego. After the wedding, though, the condescension shifted into something more aggressive. Every event I planned for the Remingtons was questioned, micromanaged, or undermined. At family gatherings, I became the unpaid help with a smile. They'd laugh and say things like, "Well, at least we never need to hire anyone with Isabelle around," like I was a walking, talking convenience. My expertise was minimized, my presence tolerated but never truly embraced. And Ethan, he didn't defend me. He'd shrug and say, "You know how they are." That shrug became a pattern. A shield. A way to keep himself clean while I was being dirtied by snide remarks and backhanded compliments. I started feeling more like a tolerated outsider than a daughter-in-law. Still, I endured because that's what women like me were taught to do: keep your head high, your mouth shut, and your resume polished. I kept telling myself it would get better, that they'd eventually see me. Then came Vivienne's 65th birthday, and with it, a week-long family celebration in Rome. "Of course you're planning it," Ethan had said, like it was a favor I should be grateful for. I told myself this was my chance to prove myself once and for all. Rome, the eternal city, a backdrop worthy of Vivienne's ego and my professional pride. I pulled every favor I had across continents to make it perfect. Private vineyard tours, luxury transport, 5-star suites, and a final dinner on the rooftop of Ristorante Elettrino overlooking the Colosseum. I even designed custom menace and calligraphy, coordinated floral arrangements using Vivienne's favorite white peonies, and arranged a 7-course meal by a Michelin-starred chef. Every detail was exact. Every moment was flawless. But behind the scenes, things weren't adding up. Vendors began contacting me about delayed payments. I used my company's credit line to cover deposits, convinced Ethan would sort it out later. When I asked, he said the family accountant was just being cautious with international wires. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I hadn't tethered my business, my life, to a sinking ship. Then came the morning we left for Rome. Ethan was in the shower when his phone buzzed with a message that would unravel everything. I never checked his phone. I never needed to, but something, call it intuition, call it survival, made me pick it up. And there it was, can't wait to see you in Rome. Have you told her yet? From Vanessa Hughes. Vanessa, his ex-girlfriend, the one Vivienne always mentioned as the one that got away. The woman they had expected him to marry. The woman who was now pregnant with his baby due in 4 months. The text stretched back months, plans, promises, affection, and timelines. It wasn't just a fling. It was a replacement. A carefully choreographed exit I hadn't been informed of yet. I screenshot everything, emailed it to myself, then deleted the evidence from his phone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just zipped up my suitcase and smiled. Because I wasn't going to cancel Rome. I wasn't going to rage or beg or fall into their trap. No, I had something better. I had a plan. As our plane descended into Fiumicino Airport and the golden light of sunset bathed the rooftops of Rome, I slipped on my sunglasses and adjusted my scarf. The Remingtons were all chattering around me, completely unaware I was just the help after all. Just the planner. I'd spent my life turning other people's stories into fairy tales. Now I was rewriting the ending of mine. And this time they wouldn't see it coming. The Remingtons' arrival in Rome was predictably a spectacle of entitlement. They complained about the luxury vans I'd arranged to transport them from the airport, insisting they were a bit pedestrian for a family of their status. Vivienne wrinkled her nose and said, "I thought we requested Bentleys." I smiled politely and replied, "These are from the same fleet, the US. Ambassador uses only the best." The 5-star hotel I selected greeted them with Italian champagne and rose petals scattered in each suite, just as requested. But Vivienne barely glanced at the welcome baskets of truffle oils, silk scarves, and handwritten itineraries I had spent weeks curating. "We'll just play it by ear," she said, tossing the schedule onto a marble table. Ethan gave me a quick, apologetic smile and mouthed, "She's just being her usual self." That night's welcome dinner was held at a charming trattoria I had rented out entirely for the family. The seating arrangement somehow shifted last minute, placing me at the far end of the table away from Ethan, next to his uncle Gerald, who referred to me as the girl who throws parties. Laughter flowed easily at the other end, where Vivienne and Vanessa's name came up more than once in old stories. I drank my wine and stayed silent, calculating. The next few days were a blur of carefully planned luxury and thinly veiled exclusion. I'd wake to find Ethan already gone. His scribbled note saying he was grabbing breakfast with Dad or handling last-minute errands. The family took spontaneous day trips, ones I only found out about through whispers in the hallway or Instagram posts. When I asked Ethan, he simply shrugged. "They just decided last minute you were busy anyway." Busy planning Vivienne's 65th birthday dinner, an event they wanted but wanted to forget I was responsible for. I was the invisible backbone of the week, the shadow behind the spotlight. The guests praised Ethan for his vision and Vivienne for her taste. Meanwhile, I coordinated linen shades to match the sunset and made sure the French rose was chilled to exactly 47 degrees. But then, 3 days in, the truth punched me in the gut again, harder this time. Ethan left in a rush to meet his brother for drinks and forgot his briefcase in our suite. Curiosity didn't guide me this time, necessity did. Inside, I found them separation documents drafted by the Remington family attorney. There was even a script, an actual word-for-word script detailing how Ethan would announce our amicable separation during his toast at the birthday dinner. The narrative was clear. We'd grown apart, we respected each other deeply, and we both agreed it was time. It was written like a press release, not a goodbye, between two people who once claimed to love each other. And worse than the script was the proposed financial settlement. A paltry sum meant to look generous but insulting when compared to what I'd helped them build and protect. They had no idea I knew about the failed investments, the mounting debts, the offshore accounts I'd glimpsed on Ethan's laptop months ago. They were going to ditch me cleanly, publicly, and still expect me to pay for the show. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I photographed every page, every number, every paragraph of manipulation. Then I zipped the briefcase back up and started building my exit. Every day after that, I made excuses to return early to the suite. I dug deeper into Ethan's files, into Vivienne's printed emails, into the shared documents no one thought I'd see. I found bookings for a maternity suite in Vanessa's name. I found a note from Vivienne that read, "Once this unpleasantness with Isabelle is over, we can finally move forward." They thought they had everything under control, Ethan, Vivienne, even the family lawyer. But they had underestimated the woman who made a living navigating chaos for billionaires with impossible demands. My pain became my blueprint. I began preparing for war. I double-checked every contract for the birthday dinner. All vendor agreements, deposits, and guarantees were in my name or Monroe Companies. I had final approval on everything. They hadn't noticed, too distracted by their schemes and their arrogance. The morning of Vivian's birthday, I woke up early and slipped out of bed while Ethan was still asleep. I took a long shower, drank an espresso in silence, and laid out my gown for the evening, a midnight blue piece I'd had custom fitted, sleek and powerful. I was no longer there as a wife. I was there as a storm. Midday, I returned to the hotel's business center to print final confirmations for the event. While waiting, I heard Vivian's voice drift through from the adjacent concierge desk, sharp, impatient, and unmistakable. "There will be 12 seats, not 13, she snapped. "My son and I have discussed this. His wife will not be staying for dinner." My stomach twisted, but my hands didn't shake. I closed my laptop and stood up, back straight and eyes forward. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was deliberate. They were planning to humiliate me publicly, to remove my chair from the table, both literally and symbolically. They wanted me to make a scene, to look unstable and fragile in front of Rome's elite. They wanted to take everything and make it look like I was the one who broke, but they had miscalculated. I walked directly to the service elevator and made a quiet call to Marco, the manager at Ristorante El Eterno. We had spoken frequently in the weeks leading up to the event. "Marco," I said, calm but firm, "we're activating the contingency." He paused, then said, "Understood, Senora Monroe. I'll be ready." By 5 o'clock, I had drafted cancellation requests to every vendor involved in the dinner: florist, catering, wine supplier, photographer. One by one, I transferred funds back into my business account. The dinner, the luxury yacht tour, the post-event villa stay in Tuscany, every reservation they were counting on, gone. And the Remingtons didn't even know it yet. I returned to our suite, showered, and applied my makeup slowly. Every brushstroke was armor. Every detail was precision. The woman they tried to erase was stepping into the spotlight. At 6:30 p.m., the family gathered in the hotel lobby for pre-dinner photos. Vivian was radiant in vintage Chanel, her diamond necklace glinting under the lights. "Isabelle, darling, you look surprisingly elegant," she said with a tone that barely masked her disdain. Ethan placed a hand on my back, smiling for the photographer like we were still the golden couple. The black cars pulled up in front of the hotel and we all piled in. The ride was short, filled with shallow small talk and forced laughter. I said nothing. I didn't need to. As we arrived at the rooftop terrace of Ristorante El Eterno, the sun was setting behind the Colosseum, casting everything in a golden hue. The table was set exactly as I had designed it: white peonies, crystal stemware, custom-printed menus. The champagne was chilling. The lights were dimmed to just the right warmth. I waited, watching as each guest took their seat. One by one, 12 chairs were filled. I approached the table slowly in my midnight gown, heart pounding but face composed. There was no chair for me. If you find these stories inspiring and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. For a moment, I stood perfectly still at the head of the table, every molecule in my body screaming, but my face unreadable. Conversations faltered, forks paused midair, and all 12 Remington faces turned toward me. Their expressions ranged from amused to confused, none surprised. This was the moment they had orchestrated, and I had just walked straight into it. Vivian blinked with feigned innocence and asked, "Oh, is something wrong, dear?" I kept my gaze locked on her, noticing the flicker of triumph she couldn't quite hide. "My place setting is missing," I said calmly, voice cool like the champagne they had just begun to sip. A ripple of faux concern passed around the table, but not a single person stood. Ethan rose slightly from his seat, playing the part of the surprised husband. "That's odd," he said with a shallow chuckle. "Guess we miscounted?" The others laughed lightly, the kind of laughter meant to sting. It was so rehearsed, so polished, I almost applauded their performance. They had planned it all: the chair, the reaction, the carefully timed dismissal. This was how they were going to erase me, not with drama, but with a disappearing act. One final humiliation before making me vanish from their narrative. I scanned their faces: Vivian sipping her wine like a queen, Richard pretending not to notice, Melissa smirking into her napkin. Even Ethan's sister Claire looked uncomfortable but said nothing. They all knew. They had all agreed to this. I took a breath, then spoke slowly and clearly. "Seems I'm not family." The words fell heavy, louder than any shout, slicing through the carefully maintained ambience like a blade. I turned and walked away, back straight, steps firm. No one stopped me. No one called after me. That, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. As soon as I reached the elevator, I pulled out my phone and opened the event management app. The cancellation orders I'd prepared sat waiting in draft form. I pressed send one by one, vendor after vendor, dinner, photography, entertainment, the entire Tuscany villa weekend. Then I messaged Marco, the restaurant manager. Within minutes, he confirmed payment had been reversed, authorization removed, account locked. Ristorante El Eterno would require a new credit card to continue service, and as per my instructions, he was to wait 30 minutes before informing them, long enough for the first course to be served, long enough for the performance to reach its peak. I crossed the street to a small cafe with a perfect view of the rooftop, ordered a double espresso, sat back and watched. The quiet before the storm was always my favorite part of event planning. My phone buzzed exactly 29 minutes later. First, a call from Ethan. I let it ring. Then a text. What's going on? Marco says the payment didn't go through. I smiled slightly, stirred my coffee, and typed back, ask your mother. Maybe she miscounted that too. Next came a series of increasingly panicked texts from Richard and Melissa. This is embarrassing. Fix this now. You're making a scene. But I wasn't the one who made a scene. They had written the script, I just flipped the ending. 31 minutes in, Marco sent me a message, ready to proceed. I texted back one word, now. Then I rose from my seat, smoothed my dress, and walked back toward the restaurant's side entrance. Through the staff hallway, I made my way to a discreet viewing point just behind a lattice partition near the kitchen. From there, I had a perfect view of the table as Marco approached. The Remingtons were on their second course, but the tension in their shoulders was rising. Marco leaned down and whispered something into Richard's ear. Richard's face blanched instantly. He pulled out his phone, scrolled rapidly, then looked up at Marco and shook his head violently. Marco held firm. Vivienne leaned in next, her posture stiffening. What is the meaning of this? I heard her hiss. Marco gestured calmly to the waiting staff, then to the iPad in his hand, my signed agreements, my payment transfers, my withdrawal of guarantees. Chaos unfurled like clockwork. Richard rose to his feet, voice raised slightly. There's clearly been some kind of mistake. Marco didn't budge. Senora Monroe has canceled the event. Unless a new payment is made, we must pause service. Forks hit plates. Napkins were dropped. Ethan stood abruptly, eyes scanning the restaurant like he could spot me through the walls. His phone lit up again, this time with a message from me. You canceled my seat. I canceled your party. He disappeared down the hallway, phone to his ear. I waited until he was halfway to the kitchen before stepping out from behind the partition. Our eyes met. He froze. Isabelle, what the hell do you think you're doing? I walked toward him slowly, never breaking eye contact. What you all planned, I said evenly. A night to remember. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Don't. You've already done enough touching behind my back. His eyes widened. You knew? I nodded. Vanessa, the baby, the settlement, the script. I saw it all. He swallowed hard. You don't understand. This isn't how I wanted. Spare me. I cut in. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to control the story. Now I'm telling it myself. He looked genuinely panicked now, like a man whose carefully built house of lies was finally on fire. You're going to destroy everything. I tilted my head. I'm just leveling the playing field. I walked past him, past the Remingtons still seated in stunned silence, past Vivienne gripping her pearls like prayer beads. I stopped at the head of the table, looked each of them in the eye. Thank you all for reminding me who I am. This was the last event I'll ever plan for you. Vivienne stood, trembling with rage. You're nothing without us. I turned slowly, smiled, and said, no, you're nothing without me. Then I walked out, heels clicking, dress flowing, spine straighter than it had ever been. Outside, Rome's evening air felt crisp and electric. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with freedom. My phone buzzed one last time. Marco. They've left. The bill was left unpaid. I replied, send them the invoice, with interest. I left the restaurant with no plan to return, no regrets, and no more illusions. Rome stretched out before me like a stage I had finally reclaimed. Every stone beneath my heels felt like validation for every moment. I had been dismissed. I wasn't escaping, I was ascending. The next morning, I boarded an earlier flight home, upgrading to first class with the miles I earned booking every Remington vacation. I sipped champagne as the sun rose over the clouds, feeling a kind of peace that had eluded me for years. My wedding ring sat quietly in my handbag, not on my finger. I had no intention of ever wearing it again. By the time I landed in Boston, the ripple effects were already visible. My inbox was flooded with messages from vendors, clients, and even a few society reporters. Is it true? They asked. Did you really walk out of the Remington Gala? I answered none of them, but I didn't need to. That afternoon, I checked into a suite at the Liberty Hotel and sent a courier to the brownstone to retrieve my belongings. I didn't want to see Ethan or anyone with his last name. The movers packed everything that was mine, my clothes, my books, my grandmother's piano, and the artwork I had collected before the marriage. I left the rest behind like a bad habit. 3 days later, the Boston Globe ran a headline, Remington Holdings under financial review after international incident. It didn't mention my name, but the details were enough. Insiders leaked that payments had bounced, vendors were suing, and certain family trusts were being investigated. The scandal spread through the city's elite like fire through dry leaves. Ethan tried calling the same day the story dropped. I didn't answer, so he emailed, then showed up at my office. "Please, Isabelle," he said, standing outside the glass doors, "just talk to me." I let my assistant inform him I was unavailable. Later, I received a letter from a Remington attorney requesting that I return sensitive financial documents. I forwarded the letter to my own lawyer, who responded with a 3-word reply, "Come and try." I had no intention of releasing anything unless they tried to come for me first. Then, and only then, would the entire truth go public. A week after the restaurant implosion, Ethan managed to corner me at a charity gala I hadn't expected him to attend. He looked thinner, rattled, his confidence drained. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, voice hoarse. "You humiliated my family." I looked him straight in the eye. "No, Ethan, I gave your family what they gave me, nothing." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had no rehearsed line to fall back on. "You don't understand," he said finally. "This has torn us apart. My mother is devastated." I nodded slowly, and yet somehow I feel more whole than I ever did in that family. He sighed. "Vanessa's pregnant, yes, but I didn't plan this. My mother pushed everything. The dinner, the script, even the seat arrangement." I raised an eyebrow. "And you? Did someone push you into cheating too?" He flinched. "You were always so in control, so good at everything. I didn't know how to measure up." I felt a pang, then not pity, but understanding of just how small he had always been. "So instead, you tried to shrink me." I left him standing there in the corner of the ballroom, surrounded by people who now looked through him instead of at him. The Remingtons were no longer the royal family of Boston. Their legacy was cracking. And the woman they once overlooked was now the subject of quiet admiration and whispered respect. Clients began reaching out, not in judgment, but in solidarity. "What you did," one said, "was something most of us only dream of." I was no longer just a planner. I had become something else entirely, a symbol of quiet power reclaiming its voice. 1 month later, my divorce papers arrived. I reviewed them carefully with my attorney, noting that the Remingtons had backed down from every demand. No settlement negotiations, no gag order, just a clean break. I signed them with a Mont Blanc pen Ethan had once given me after a gala. I remembered the moment he placed it in my hand, saying, "You'll change the city one signature at a time." He was right, he just never imagined the signature would be on the divorce that ended him. Vivienne, unsurprisingly, never contacted me, but her name began appearing less and less on charity boards, replaced by younger, newer faces with fewer skeletons. Word got around that Remington Holdings had quietly dissolved 2 of its subsidiaries. The empire was thinning. On the 1-year anniversary of that night in Rome, I was back in Italy. This time I was planning a wedding for one of the top 10 most followed influencers in Europe. It was being held at a cliffside villa in Amalfi, breathtaking, exclusive, and utterly mine to command. I stood on the balcony in a black jumpsuit, headset on, clipboard in hand, giving final directions to the staff. A young intern glanced at me and whispered, "I heard what you did in Rome." I turned to her, surprised. She blushed. "It's legendary." I smiled, but said nothing. The story had traveled further than I thought. But I hadn't done it to be remembered. I had done it to be free. Later that night, as fireworks burst over the sea and the bride and groom danced under fairy lights, I slipped away to the terrace. I looked out over the water, thinking about the missing chair at that Remington table. The moment that broke something in me, but also the moment that built something new. You don't realize how much you've given until you finally stop giving. You don't know how loud your silence can be until you walk away and say nothing. And you don't know what real power feels like until you stop begging for a seat and start building your own damn table. I lifted a glass of Prosecco to the sky, eyes locked on the horizon. Here's to what they tried to take, and here's to everything they accidentally gave me in return. If there's one thing I've learned from everything that happened, it's this: never let anyone make you feel like you're lucky just to be included. For years, I bent myself into a smaller and smaller version of who I was, just to fit into a family that never really wanted me there. I thought if I worked harder, stayed quiet, made things easier for everyone else, they would finally see me. But some people will never respect you no matter how much you give because they've already decided you don't belong. What they didn't realize is that being excluded, being pushed aside, being underestimated, those things don't break women like me. They build us. Every time they dismissed me, I sharpened my instincts. Every time they tried to humiliate me, I learned to stand taller. And Every time they laughed at me behind closed doors, I took mental notes until one day I stopped playing their game and started rewriting the rules. You see, it's easy to stay silent. It's easy to believe the lie that keeping the peace means keeping your place. But real peace doesn't come from pretending everything's fine. Real peace comes from walking away from what hurts you, even if it means walking alone. The truth is, you don't need to scream to reclaim your worth. Sometimes the loudest power is silence. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living free without bitterness, without permission, without fear. And sometimes the moment you're pushed out of the room is the moment you realize you never belonged there in the first place. And that's the gift. I used to think being needed was the same as being loved. That if I planned the perfect events, supported everyone's goals, made everything beautiful and seamless, I would earn a permanent seat at the table. But love built on usefulness isn't love, it's convenience. And when people only value you for what you do and not who you are, walking away is not weakness, it's self-respect. I walked out of that restaurant in Rome with nothing but my dignity, and it turns out that was everything I needed. Because once you choose yourself over people who only chose you when it served them, you become unstoppable. You stop shrinking, you stop apologizing, you stop waiting for someone else to hand you a seat. And you start building a life that no one else gets to control. So to anyone listening who feels invisible, who's tired of giving and getting crumbs in return, I want you to know you don't need their chair, their approval, or their permission. You are enough just as you are. And the moment you stop begging to belong is the moment you realize you already just not where they told you to stay.